They say all politics are local, and sometimes all the local news is political. I'm Matt Reed in the Florida Today newsroom. This week we take a closer look at county, state, and national developments with my favorite local political scientist, Chris Muro of Eastern Florida State College. Will George Zimmerman's acquittal for shooting Trayvon Martin shake up Central Florida politics in the month ahead? Who's lining up to run for Brevard County Commission, and why? Does gay marriage stand a chance politically in Florida? And will it help or hurt Space Coast Congressman Bill Posey to oppose popular immigration reforms authored by Senator Marco Rubio, a fellow Republican? Here's my interview with Professor Muro. The big news story this week was the verdict in the Trayvon Martin, George Zimmerman case. Does something like this potentially impact elections and politics here in Central Florida going forward?
Well, it has the potential, Matt. The big issue here, I think, that politicians will perhaps try to seize on is the gun control issue. Will the verdict in this trial be an impetus to more gun control proposals and perhaps maybe tweaking Florida's self-defense laws, stand your ground, and things of that nature? So I think those are some of the issues to look out for as we move forward from this verdict.
But given the politics and the makeup of our legislature, it seems likely that you might hear a call for more gun control, but is something likely to actually pass in Tallahassee?
Not in Florida. No, I don't think that Florida is moving in the direction of more gun control, stricter gun regulations. NRA is very influential in the state of Florida. Republican-controlled legislature is very open to and responsive to gun rights owners and activists. And so I think Florida's, as far as gun control goes, I think that issue is off the table right now.
What about the issue of race in politics in Florida? You have this one side in this case saying, it's not about race at all. Then you have another side saying, well, this race still really matters.
Sure.
The fact that they completely disagree, to me, says there's something here where race matters. But how do we see this manifesting itself in campaigns or in the way people vote in Florida?
My initial reaction is I don't think that it's going to be a big factor. There is a racial divide on the Zimmerman trial and its outcome, the same way there was with the OJ trial. Unfortunately, blacks and whites see this issue completely in polar opposite ways. But Democrats can count on African American voters, so I don't see that changing the game at all here in Florida. I think there'll be some media attention. Maybe some civil rights activists will try to keep this going. But I think at the end of the day, I don't think it's a game changer.
Let's talk about Brevard County elections a little bit. One of the issues that has been cooking here in Brevard was the issue of schools and a tax. There were a number of schools closed and also other cuts that were made because a tax didn't pass in the election that you and I covered during the fall. Do you think that something like that might come back and might pass? What do you make of that?
Well, I know that the school board is in need of revenue, and it does seem that they're going to try to bring something back for the 2014 election. Now, one thing we have to keep in mind is that the electorate is going to be a lot different in 2014 than it was in 2012.
How so?
Well, usually there's about a 12 points drop in turnout in midterm or off-year elections.
Okay.
In 2012, President Obama was at the top of the ticket. Bill Nelson was on the ballot. There was a lot of incentive to bring Democrats, minority voters, younger voters to the polls, and I think the president did that. But in midterm elections, we see a substantial drop in turnout, and the electorate is much older, higher percentage of Caucasian voters, and in Brevard County, more Republicans. So I believe that in 2014, it's going to be a very difficult sell for the school board, particularly if they try to go again with the sales tax increase. If you remember, Matt, in 2008, which was a presidential election year,
Right.
the Tax and Budget Reform Commission put a ballot initiative that just allowed counties the option to think about a 1-cent sales tax that would be dedicated to community colleges exclusively. And that initiative failed miserably. They didn't even get 40% of the vote approving it. So I think the sales tax is the wrong way to go. And I think that the school board in 2014 is going to have a much more difficult time getting a tax increase approved.
Well, they made a calculated decision the last time to not facilitate a campaign in some fashion, afraid that the people that were going to oppose that campaign might be so strong that it would backfire to campaign for the tax. Does that make sense, or should they just go for it this time?
Well, I think that the case needs to be made. The case for additional tax increases, especially during the economic situation that we find ourselves in, I think the case has to be made to the voters. And I think it's rather irresponsible not to get out in front of this and provide some leadership. If this is something the school board needs and that Brevard County's future depends on, the school board needs to make that case.
What about the issues that might be coming up for the county commission races? Looks like it's pretty crowded for County Commission District 4, which is that Melbourne, Vieira, Satellite Beach Central area. Also, there's a turnover in County Commission District 2, which is Merritt Island, Cocoa, now down in Rockledge and Cocoa Beach as well. What kind of issues do you see playing a big part in those races?
Well, both of these races are fascinating on a number of levels. First off, in the District 4 race, you've got 9 announced candidates right now, all of them Republican.
Okay.
And in the District 2 race, you've got 5 announced candidates, all of them Republican. So we do see that I think most people, most observers would agree whoever wins this primary is going to be the next commissioner from District 2 and District 4. And that's why we're seeing a very crowded Republican field already. And we're still, 16 months or more away from that election.
It seems like in Brevard County, especially in those 2 races, the choices between the mainline Republican, the business Republican, and sort of the populist Tea Party Republican. That hasn't been solved yet. I mean, there's been a number of elections, and how have these turned out in the recent races?
Well, I think the Tea Party in Brevard County has had limited success at the local level in particular. Trudy Infantini, Commissioner of District 3, Scott Ellis, I would assume would classify himself that way. But I think outside of that, the Tea Party's had a limited effect. In District 4, we do have 2 candidates, Matt and I, who ran previously as a Tea Party candidate unsuccessfully. Kurt Smith, business owner in Melbourne, also has ties to Tea Party activists. And then you have some mainline, more moderate type Republicans. And I don't want to classify any of them here, but one of my colleagues at the college, Bill Klein, is also running for that District 4 seat. So I think you're going to see whoever can mobilize their base is going to be the one who's going to emerge victorious in such a crowded field. But Matt, you're right. The issues are going to be, I believe, taxes, spending, and whether or not the county is being financially responsible with the money that they have, and if we're going to move in the direction of the status quo or in reducing the size of county government even further.
One of the issues that was put on the political landscape recently was the Supreme Court's decision on gay marriage, which left a lot of people in Florida wondering, where do we stand? What might happen in Florida? What's your take?
Well, I think there were 2 decisions. One was on the Defense of Marriage Act, the other one on California's Proposition 8. I think in both of those decisions, the court really went for a minimalist outcome. They didn't go big like they did on abortion and some other issues. They really took a minimalist approach here. On the DOMA question, I find it interesting is what the court said was, well, you know, states that have recognized gay marriage, the federal government has to conform to those states. And the states that have not recognized it, then the DOMA provision, well, in essence, would stand. So it's all contingent on what the state does. In essence, saying the state law here is supreme to the federal law. Right now we have 13 jurisdictions that are recognizing gay marriage. Florida is not one of them. Proposition 8, that ruling didn't really address the merits of the ban on gay marriage, just on who could bring the lawsuit forward. So right now I think what we're seeing is 35 states continue to have a ban on gay marriage. In Florida right now, there does seem to be growing support for recognizing gay marriage. However, I don't think that there's the 60% support that would be needed to overturn the current prohibition in our state constitution.
That's right, because that is a constitutional amendment.
It sure is, yes.
In Florida.
That's right. The 27th section of Article 1 was adopted in 2008. So it will take 60% to repeal that provision. Right now, the support isn't there to do that.
It seemed to create a funny situation, the court ruling, where if another state allows gay marriage, you could potentially go to that other state, get married as a gay couple, then come back to Florida and still enjoy the federal protections and tax benefits and survivorship and all those other kinds of things that that case was about, but still not have your marriage recognized by Florida and Florida's government, or a divorce recognized by Florida or Florida's government. Is that correct?
That's correct.
So you might have to go back to Massachusetts, New York, or someplace to get your divorce if that's unfortunately what happens.
Right.
Interesting.
Well, there are a lot of unanswered questions here. Like I said, the court went for a minimalist approach. There are unanswered questions that remain. Will the ability for states to not recognize what other states have done, will that stand? Is a state's prohibition on gay marriage unconstitutional? Those questions still remain unanswered.
Do you foresee somebody at the state level, like the legislature, trying to put something on a ballot as a reaction to this? Not the let's legalize gay marriage, but let's double super ban it somehow in order to help drive turnout in the next election?
Ban it even further?
Yeah, is that even possible?
I don't think so. I don't think so. I think the current language there that's there in the Florida Constitution now was designed to take this out of the judicial realm at the state level. So I think that the opponents of gay marriage accomplished what they wanted to do in 2008. I think now what we're seeing is proponents of gay marriage are going to go state by state trying to undo state laws and state constitutional amendments to start to expand the map to have more states include gay marriage. So I think that's what we're seeing now in Virginia, Pennsylvania, all over the country. I wouldn't be surprised in the next legislative session to see Democrats propose an amendment to legalize gay marriage here, although I don't think it'll make it to the ballot.
Probably not. Let's talk about the gubernatorial race in Florida a little bit. Look, Governor Scott appears likely to run for re-election.
Right.
Charlie Crist, former Republican, former independent, now a Democrat, is out there somewhere. I think Nan Rich is a Democrat who has had her name bandied about to some degree. What do you foresee happening in this?
Well, this is, I think, one of the most interesting races in the country right now. Now, there's some good news for Governor Scott. He's no longer viewed as the most vulnerable Republican incumbent in the country. That designation now goes to Tom Corbett in Pennsylvania.
Okay.
So there's some good news for Rick Scott on that front. Also, some of the latest polling does have Rick Scott, his approval has inched up from a low of 36% to about 43% in the last poll. So those are some good numbers, some good news for Governor Scott. Now on the flip side, he's still underwater when it comes to public approval, and 51% of voters say he doesn't deserve a second term. So there are some very interesting and conflicting variables out there that really makes this race extremely unpredictable. He's very vulnerable, Governor Scott, but the Democrats have a big problem, the same problem Republicans had in 2012. They don't have a candidate, a viable candidate. Charlie Crist has some problems, you know, switching parties. Nan Rich, unable to come up with the fundraising and the name recognition. I think that'll be an impediment. Bill Nelson's name has been thrown around. Obviously, he would be a strong candidate, but he has not expressed interest. So I think that's one of the problems the Democrats are facing. It's 20 years since we've elected a Democratic governor from the state of Florida, Matt.
And that was?
Lawton Chiles,
okay.
1994.
Well, what happens if Charlie Crist does get in it? Charlie Crist seems like the type of person who just can't resist.
Well, he does seem to be able to occupy pretty much every office, from state senator to attorney general to education commissioner to governor. You know, he's pretty much done it all. So, I mean, he's got a strong track record. He's an excellent fundraiser. He's a likable candidate. So there's a lot going for Charlie Crist. I think that his moving from Republican to independent to Democrat, I think may cause him some troubles. But right now, polling goes, he is looking pretty well in the polling. He's got high favorability ratings right now. But of course, the campaign has really not begun yet.
Consumer confidence and the economy have got to make a big difference to all of this. I mean, it seems like consumer confidence is on the upswing in Florida. It's hard to, you know, when we poll people who vote in Florida, sometimes they can't decide whether they're going to credit the governor or credit the president or credit who for this, but it has to help. It has to help Governor Scott.
Well, the latest news is a good news for the governor. 7.2% unemployment in Florida now, lower than the national average, which is a substantial drop. So I think the governor will have the money to be able to run a very, very effective campaign. He's going to take credit for the job growth that's been taking place since he became governor. So I think there are some things that he can run on. And he's, like I said, he's got the financing to do it. The question is going to be, will the Democrats be able to recruit a top-tier viable candidate to take on Governor Scott?
If the economy is doing well by next year and the focus isn't so much on the economy, does a governor whose primary selling point was that he was the jobs guy, the business guy, does it lose some of that luster or some of that immediacy for him? I mean, he is the incumbent and can point to growth in Florida and take some credit for that. But when times are good, isn't there another basket of issues that voters go back to?
No question about it. No question about it. But I would think, Matt, that by 2014, I think we're still going to be in a situation that's rather precarious as far as the recovery goes. Because yes, the unemployment rate, while it's ticking down, job growth is moving in the right direction. We still see a large number of people underemployed, working in part-time jobs. So while, you know, the news is good, it's reserved in that it's not as strong as we want it to be. So I still think that even with the good news, in 2014, the economy is still going to be a dominant issue. Unlike immigration, by the way.
Let's talk about that. Let's talk about those federal issues, especially as they pertain to the Space Coast and people who represent us here. Marco Rubio has really kind of taken a risk and has campaigned pretty strongly in favor of immigration reform. But then you have other people like Bill Posey, who are more from the, you would think that they come from the same wing of the party, but seem to be dead set against it. How does this affect somebody like Marco Rubio, and do you think he matters to the passage of that reform?
Well, it's passed the Senate. So the Gang of Eight, the so-called Gang of Eight bill, has passed the Senate, but it's meeting stiff opposition and resistance in the House of Representatives. I think if you look at the latest polling out of Iowa, of all places, Matt, I know, what does that have to do with anything?
Now, why would anyone look at Iowa?
Exactly. And that's, of course, of its crucial status as one of the first in the nation, along with New Hampshire, for presidential politics. Marco Rubio, in the latest polling, has dropped from first place in Iowa to fifth place in Iowa for presidential contenders for the 2016 election. This was published just last week, this latest polling information. So he went from first place to fifth place. Immigration is the key thing here. For Marco Rubio, like you said, he really put a lot on the line here, and it doesn't seem to be breaking his way. Now, there might be support for it in general, but remember, in order for Marco Rubio to continue moving forward, he's going to have to get the Republican nomination. And it does seem that the largest block of opposition to immigration reform, as it's been put forth by the Senate, does come from the Republican Party.
I was struck by Congressman Posey's, from Brevard County here, his outlook on this. It was almost an instantaneous no to immigration reform. Regardless of how much border security was built in there, it was no, we've got to seal the border first, kind of an outlook. Does that help or hurt? I mean, there's lots of talk about, well, the Republican Party needs to come around somehow on immigration reform in order to win a national election. Do they really?
I don't think they do. I don't think that the empirical evidence demonstrates that at all. As far as immigration reform goes, this issue among the American people, Gallup just recently demonstrated that immigration reform was among the bottom of the issues of concern to the American people. So I think in general, the general voter, immigration reform, if it passes or if it doesn't, is really not a game changer. So as far as Bill Posey goes, the question really, I think Bill Posey will be in that seat until he decides to retire. It really, every election for Bill Posey is whether or not he's going to get to 60% or not. So I think Bill Posey's in a strong position to act on his own principles. Someone like Marco Rubio, though, has a whole state that he has to appeal to rather than just a smaller congressional district.
Right.
I think that makes that's a bigger issue, and I think it's a disadvantage to Marco Rubio, because I think a lot of voters are apprehensive about a pathway to citizenship. They don't like the current system. They think it's broken, but they're also very concerned. They don't trust Washington. There's a major trust gap in Washington. The view of the federal government's at the lowest approval it's been in decades.
It's striking to me in looking at a couple of the issues that have come up, background checks for guns being one of them, immigration reform being another. Neither one of these issues are among the top issues like jobs or the economy, but Americans did seem to very strongly break in one direction or another. For example, 9 out of 10, including gun owners, favored background checks. I think something like 3/4 of people support immigration. Floridians support immigration reform, the concepts that are in that bill.
Right.
Yet,
nothing moves forward.
Nothing moves forward
as far as legislation.
So does that come back and bite anybody, or are people's districts so safe that
I wouldn't
it just
say
doesn't matter?
I wouldn't say that it's because their districts are so safe. I would say that people are in favor of common sense regulations on guns. They just trust their state and local government more to be more effective than they do their national government. They're not really looking to the national government to step in on guns. They much more would trust and prefer if their state and local government address that. And on immigration reform, yeah, they do support the general broad concepts, but once you start getting into the specifics, I think that's where the support starts to unravel. I think a lot of the politicians know that, that's exactly what's going to happen, so they can stand firm on their principles or on the beliefs that they have, and they can oppose these gun control and immigration reform laws and still be safe for re-election.
I'm always struck by how many people really are so concerned about that border here in a place like Brevard County, where most of our illegal immigrants, when we have them, come from Europe, South America. They come by jet, not across the border, and work in a completely different, service sector, tourism kinds of jobs as opposed to over there. Yet that fear is what really seems to concern people the most, even here on the east coast of Florida.
Right. Well, from my own personal perspective, I would prefer to see some system where, we have a lot of industries that are dependent on labor that's coming from Central America, Mexico in particular. So I do think there needs to be something that would accommodate the need for that labor, the desire for the worker to be employed, the desire for the employer to hire. But I think that the idea of citizenship and giving political rights, and a lot of people think illegals are expensive. Wait till they become citizens. Citizens are a lot more expensive because they're eligible for so many more programs. So I think that there are a lot of issues here that really have to be debated and discussed, and there's a lot of consequences that can come from this bill. So I do urge caution and prudence, Matt, and I'd like to see that before the House moves forward.
Chris Mira, thank you so much for joining us.
Matt, it's always a pleasure.
I look forward to breaking these down on election night in 2014.
I'm looking forward to that too.
Well, that's our program. Remember, you can publish your opinion on anything you see in this program by sending an email to letters@floridatoday.com. We'll see you right here next week on WEFS. Look for updates on floridatoday.com.